Let's hear more from a colleague of mine about this important subject.
As we start thinking about the different types of employees, you're often going to hear exempt versus non-exempt. And to start just there, what we're talking about, or what is often talked about, is whether or not somebody is exempt from overtime pay or not. And there are often changing rules, so I won't even bother quoting what those are today, because by the time you're watching anything, it could change. But you're looking for what are the minimums that need to be in place and the type of role that somebody is in, about whether or not they can be exempt from being paid overtime or not. And that's really what we're talking about with exempt versus non-exempt. Often business owners will say, oh, I'm putting so-and-so on salary and it's going to be X dollars a month, so they don't get overtime. And that may be what the business owner intends, but that may not be the law. And so there are some things that need to be tracked in every organization. If somebody is going to be non-exempt, that means that they could potentially be getting overtime pay, which means that we really should be keeping up with how many hours they work. Does not necessarily mean that they actually have to truly punch in and punch out on a time clock, but they do need to have something that states the hours that they worked if there's ever a question. So those are some considerations to keep in mind. Again, we're not the ones that write the law. We are the ones that are supposed to be helping our small business owners understand that there are rules that they should follow. These are the recommendations that we make, and ultimately they are responsible if somebody came back and wanted that information or did an audit, that they would have it, but we just need to make sure that we do that. The other area that can be extremely confusing is whether or not somebody is an employee or an independent contractor. I often hear, well, I'm a W-2 employee, or I have W-2 employees versus 1099 employees. No, you don't. You have either employees that get W-2s, or you have contractors or independent contractors that are getting 1099s at the end of the year. And there is definitely a difference. And again, there are many laws that are going to identify the type of person that is going to be an employee versus somebody that can be an independent contractor. I always tell my small business owners that we are going to lean toward employee many, many times, because there are so many rules that are making that independent contractor relationship much more stringent, that would potentially move them over to be an employee. So it is extremely important to understand that if it is an independent contractor, they are not an employee. It's not a non-employee. There's no such thing as really a non-employee. It's really, are they an independent contractor? And if they are, then they are a separate business. Even if they're a sole proprietor business, it's just me doing business for somebody. Technically, that is a separate entity and is not getting a W-2 at the end of the year. That person would be filling out a form that would identify their tax information and whether or not the type of entity they are, but whether or not they're going to be getting a 1099 or not, but they would need to be filling out that form. In reality, that form should be filled out at the very beginning of that relationship, and not trying to get it toward the end of the year when it's really hard to track some people down. Really should be done at the beginning of the year, so that that 1099 can be provided automatically at the end of the year. Independent contractors are not employees, should not be treated as such, and they really are a separate business, if you will. Now, we also have one other area that we look at when we talk about different types of employees. Again, we have the exempt and non-exempt. We have the non-employees, which are independent contractors, and then regular employees. But then what do we do about the business partner, the owner of the business itself? Independent contractors, as I said, are going to be somebody that is not an employee, and they are their own separate business. They can be a sole proprietor, meaning it can be just their name, John Doe, and that is a separate business that you are paying to do work, and they would be an independent contractor. But the owner of the business itself could be a sole proprietor or another type of entity. And that can change whether or not that owner is going to be able to receive payroll or not and be an employee of the organization. Again, states can be different. The federal laws and rules can be different based on that information. But some entities, such as a single member LLC, a limited liability corporation, or a sole proprietor. Typically, if it's a sole member LLC, meaning it's just the owner, they have incorporated under an LLC, then they typically are not going to be employees. They will receive information about their business, or it could just be reported as part of their personal income taxes. And they may not receive any type of form at the end of the year per se. If they have decided to move into an S corporation status, they have had what they call an S corp election, then they may be able to be an employee. Some LLCs that have multiple members, in other words, multiple owners, might also be able to receive payroll, but there are lots of different rules and regulations on that. And so this is obviously not the place where we can go through all of those. But just to suffice it to say that as we consider the different types of employees, we also have to consider the owner themselves, the type of business that they are, and the implications that that could have for that owner, if they are an employee or not, if they are allowed to be an employee or not, and so on. Often in those scenarios, when we're starting to look at the types of employees and some of those rules and regulations, partnering with the CPA or another accounting professional to get some guidance in that, especially for newer bookkeepers, definitely the way to go, and a recommendation that I personally would make. But understanding the type of entity and the ownership structure of that business is important to determine if that business owner is considered an employee or not. And again, remember, a lot of times business owners may not really understand all of that. So having somebody provide that guidance that the bookkeeper is then able to execute on is extremely important as well. So understanding that there's some differences, understanding that there are some specific rules, that is the idea here. And then depending on the client that you're serving, you would want to dig into that a little bit deeper.